what difference is resilience going to make is very topical when we talk about South Sudan today. And is it at all possible to build resilience in the middle of a conflict? And building resilience for what? I don't know, Vanak, if you can take that challenge on.
Yeah, thank you. How many of you have answered my question? Whether the resilience, is it urgent or it is important but not urgent? So if you have not answered, then maybe I will contribute while I'm answering this question.
We can ask for a hands up. Is it
how many people took time to think about this, whether it is urgent? How many people?
It's urgent, right?
Is it urgent?
That's the right answer.
How many people think that it is important but not urgent? Really? Yeah, that's good. That's good. You have your opinion. The reason is that some of you are policymakers, and when you allocate funds, when you see the word food security, you don't give it priority. So that's the problem. That's why government are still suffering, struggling to understand how to go about resilience. My colleague, one of my friends, told me almost 20 years ago that he doesn't understand what is a communist, what does it mean, and what is gender. Because, I mean, all of us were thinking gender means women. And anyway, even yesterday, people mean women, right? And that was 10 years ago. After 2005, I sat with him, and I told him, did you understand what is gender now? He said, yeah, a little bit. What about communism? He said, well, I'm not interested in it, but I think it's okay. I asked him, what about resilience? He said, no, I never came across that word. Where did you get it? I said, okay, it's coming. I told him that is coming. Because in 2005, in the war I was telling you, I'm a trained veterinarian by profession, and I work with what was called Operation Lifeline Sudan during the war. Some of you must have heard of this and participated. Yes, so let me give you a leading answer. It is possible to build resilience during crisis, because during that time, one of the successful projects that aim at building resilience was what we call community-based livestock program, known as CBAP. Community-based livestock program was initiated by UNICEF and FAO, and it was a community demand. What is important indeed is that if we address community demands, I think resilience can be possible in any environment if we give it enough attention. So I don't want to elaborate very much, because during that time we targeted so many livestock diseases. One of them is the rinderpest eradication in South Sudan, in which most of livestock programs know this, was eradicated during the war. Though the declaration of South Sudan free from rinderpest was declared after we signed the agreement, but more or less most of the tasks and work done at the community base was done during the war. So yes, we can build resilience of communities while there are also a crisis. But there are challenges. We agree that resilience is not about food insecurity alone. It's not about nutrition. It must have a holistic approach and participatory. So if it is given priority by all stakeholders, I think we have an opportunity to achieve resilience during crisis. What we are doing now in South Sudan, there is a question about this. In South Sudan, first what we have done, at the political level, there is a National Food Security Council, which is chaired by the President. There's not much being done because it's all meeting, because it's lack data in South Sudan. If we don't have also data that people can draw policies from there, and the reason why we don't have data is that our resources are not geared towards research. Research comes at the tail of the programs in most of our priorities. Second is that whatever information we had since we took independence from the British in 1955, went with our brothers from the South. So we didn't have any technology at all or any information system. And with resilience, information sharing, I think it is a very important component. So it's very difficult also to achieve resilience if you don't have some of the information that will lead you to establish a policy. So policy decision makers are to be informed of the steps which are useful at the time. Thank you.
Let's have some more questions, but I think one interesting one many had, which is of course difficult to answer, is resources, funding, priorities. How do you get that priority? And I think the concept resilience, if it's becoming a very popular concept, then it might be a way of raising more funds for example, for better linking humanitarian action with recovery and long-term development. So it could be useful, but of course, when the CNN has left the humanitarian crisis place, it's always difficult to get the money for recovery and long-term development. Anyway, let's have a few more questions. So there is one behind there, a woman behind there, and we have a man there, and one in second row. So those three, and a fourth one there. And that's probably maybe what we have time for. We'll see how well you behave.
Okay, thank you. It's Eugenie from UNICEF, Eugenie Reedy. Thank you very much to the panel for all the rich sharing and experience and knowledge. I just wanted to suggest that while we are necessarily keeping resilience quite broad, so that we can all somehow engage with some part of it, we're keeping this idea of population and community very wide. And one thing that strikes me repeatedly is that in terms of finding entry points, something a lot of us see on the ground is that youth are critical agents of resilience and a sort of demographic hinge factor for it. We see that they facilitate or inhibit resilience, especially in terms of livelihood and security or conflict dimensions. Something we see is the scale factor of youth. They can export conflict or vulnerability across borders, and they can transfer it down generations. So I wondered if the panel had any ideas or experience about what works when it comes to resilience building with a focus on youth, or if they'd come across any examples of using youth as entry points for resilience. And then I wanted to thank our friend from South Sudan for the good example of the OLS, UNICEF, FAO collaboration, and suggest that one of the critical magic ingredients of that was it represented listening to local priorities and a closeness to communities, including youth. And it's a good reminder of what we need to get back to when we're trying to steer our entry points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Write it down, youth. Next one, where was that? That was the guy behind there, and then it's you and you. We have, so you will be after he.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dom Hunt from Concern Worldwide. I think to answer your question about how do we build resilience in conflict, you're going to have to specify what type of conflict we're talking about first. And I think, therefore, your question is impossible to answer at the moment. There are some conflicts where things go completely out of control, and maybe the only thing we can do is respond in humanitarian response to keep people alive. And I think that's perfectly all right. I think that's part of resilience. There are other conflicts where we may be able to address the underlying causes of the conflict, and we may be able to prevent the conflict, change the conflict, stop the conflict, these things. We work in Haiti, where there's gang violence in Port-au-Prince. We are able to influence the gang violence. We are able to do long-term programming. But in DRC, in Masisi, we are not able to do long-term work because we are not able to affect the conflict. Nonetheless, I think that we can nonetheless build resilience in both of these contexts, but they're entirely context-specific, and it has to be remembered. Now, I come from DRR, and if I just talk about natural hazards and what we do with natural hazards, I would get crucified. People would say, what natural hazard are you talking about? You're talking about a drought? You're talking about a flood? You're talking about a volcano? Why are we still just saying conflict and not explaining what we mean by conflict?
Well, thank you very much for reminding me about the situation specificity. Without context, no meaning, right? So.
Thank you. My question is, in principle, the resilience comes from the community itself, and also the local capacities. Promoting the local capacity is one of the most important thing to bring about the resilience. In the context of like the South Sudan as well as DRC, where there is conflict, it's very difficult to bring local capacity as well as bring the community-based solutions for this. It's almost, we have to see outside or external to solve these problems. So conflict by itself is very difficult to put into the grassroots level. So I think what kind of experience do we have just bringing such solutions to external solutions to that? Maybe now facilitating the traditional elders and religious societies and whatever communities to contacting them, or advocating these things to the higher level, to the government, to the United Nations, like that. So what experience do we have to bring resilience to the community, which is a kind of external and also kind of solution coming out of the principle? This is something that I would like to know. Thank you. I'm Abraham from Concern Worldwide Ethiopia.
Thank you. The community level resilience building challenge. So next was you, first bench.
Again, Abraham from Concern. I have a kind of question about the whole resilience and conflict and displacement. The concept conflict and displacement presupposes that the normal functioning of the society, the individual, is disrupted. And people have lost literally everything, or they are in the process of losing. So in that kind of scenario, resilience, what sense does it make unless we add a definition? Now at this stage, what we need is preservation of the human being, who is the core of everything. We have to somehow make sure that the individual or the family is secured. So it's a question of security and protection. Protection in a sense, even if you are alive, you are mentally disturbed. You are not a full functional person. There is some kind of disorder, mental, psychological, whatever. So unless we add some kind of sense of protection and preservation of the human being as a priority, and that's resilience, to keep the person intact and functional, should be the key issue, not about production and other things, because now that would be secondary. In a situation, there is always a priority. In this, it's a human, is keeping the person, the family alive. That's a priority. And alive in a sense, not only alive, but keep intact, to be a productive person, to remain a productive person. So unless you add a dimension of definition to this kind of situation, under the normal context of talking about livelihood and other things, I think for me it's too narrow.
Thank you very much. So the question is protection action point number one. So now I will ask Sandrine and Eric to address this question, but I'd like to add two more questions. One, I think, was already posed, but I don't know if it was addressed, and that's the more kind of bottom-up. What does resilience mean for a person living in a tent in a refugee camp? I mean, and this kind of bottom-up thing, I mean, what does it mean? And then the other one, which is those criticizing the concept of resilience, and in particular in relation to conflict, say it's a way of depoliticizing the whole problem, and it's easier to kind of get support for resilience, and then I think also some of you addressed that. You don't then really go into the underlying causes, so it's a way of depoliticizing. Well, English is not my mother tongue. How do you say that in English? Depoliticizing the... Good, thank you, Emmy. You understand what I mean. I'm Norwegian, so I sometimes some of these words are complicated, like this question. So We have Sandrine and then Eric.